above a pub.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, all this is really leading to the main thing I wanted to talk to you about. The thing I'm thinking about a lot is now the scaling of Bitcoin and how people use Bitcoin. Because we clearly have an issue. I don't want to say an issue with the base chain because this is the way it should scale. But we are at that kind of crossroads now with the base chain where it's getting expensive to use. I did a transaction the other day where my fee was $64. I was consolidating the UTXOs, but it was $64. I had to do another one which was like $12. You know, it's fine when you're moving. You know, what's a fair fee? What, 1%? So if you're doing $1,000 and paying $10, it's kind of okay. If you're moving $100, you
don't want to pay $10.
You don't want to pay $10. Yet a lot of work has been done to educate people about the base chain and using the base chain, and probably some people won't be or shouldn't be using that. I've also had a question I keep asking people. I still don't think we've had a good answer for.
I think because there's not an answer to it. I think self-sovereignty doesn't scale.
So I've asked a lot of people this question. I said, can you be self-sovereign if you don't own a UTXO? I've had some wishy-washy answers, some attempts at answers, but no, yes, this is how you do it. And so if that's the case, for the vast majority of people, not your keys, not your Bitcoin is not really going to be true. So I'm thinking a lot about this, and I've put it out on Twitter. You've replied. So I kind of want to get into where your thoughts are with this, especially as, you know, you're also an investor in Fedi, so you understand that. Like how much are you thinking about all of this, the scaling?
So I think about scaling a lot. And it's, I mean, you know, for when I got into Bitcoin, I had also been, you know, watching it, studying it for a while. So I went through a phase where I was interested but skeptical, to interested and convicted, right? That was a transition I went through. And what I find interesting is that a lot of people are kind of almost come off as constantly surprised by the scaling challenges, even though they were laid out in 2009, 2010. If you look at Satoshi's original emails even before Bitcoin was launched, it's on the mailing list, people were challenging the scaling. They were like, well, how is this going to scale? Or, you know, Hal Finney was talking about Bitcoin banks in 2010. And so this has been, there's actually an old joke that basically like any kind of thing you think about Bitcoin, it's all been discussed on Bitcoin Talk in the first couple of years. And this is just another one of those things that's been discussed since like literally pre-inception of the chain. And so for me, it's when I got in, I had the benefit. You know, the downside is you don't get in at like $10 Bitcoin, but the benefit is you have years of history of, you know, kind of people discussing this and seeing how it's work and kind of understanding all the pros and cons of different approaches. So for me, it was understood from the beginning that it's going to scale in layers. And also when I look at the existing financial system, we see it scale in layers. So for example, there's FedWire. It's the main, it's like the biggest, you know, kind of US settlement system. It's operated by the Fed. They settle $1 quadrillion a year, so $1,000 trillion a year. And they do it with about as many transactions as Bitcoin does. So in a given year, they do 200 million transactions, average of 5 million each. And so you get a quadrillion dollars in gross settlement, which sounds like a cartoonish number.
What are they settling? What kind of transactions?
Basically, a lot of things, like a lot of bank stuff. Like basically when banks are settling between each other, it's going through FedWire essentially. So it's one of the main clearing mechanisms in the US. It's not the only one, but it's the biggest one. And so a lot of the things that we think of as like when we make a fiat payment, it's not really final. It's basically the banks have kind of agreed and then they settle on FedWire. And that's getting updated over time with FedNow and things like that. But basically it's like the underlying base chain. And Bitcoin just kind of
to interrupt there, sorry, just very quickly. There's no transaction fee for that in that scenario. That system wouldn't have a transaction fee for banks to settle. It's just a job that Fed does on behalf of the banks, or is there?
I believe so. Or if there's a transaction fee, it'd be small. Because it's centralized. That's the thing. Centralization gives you some benefits, like efficiency. But in that case, it's like this monopoly centralized settlement system. And so Bitcoin is an open source global one. And so,
which also needs a decentralized security.
Yes. And so when I think about, like you mentioned that transactions are expensive, and you referenced like $10, for example. Whereas, you know, when I send wires to Egypt, for example, they generally cost more than $10, especially if I want them within a day or two. Generally, sometimes I'll have options. The longer I'm allowed to kind of let that sit, maybe they'll give me a discount. But if I want a transaction in a day, I might be paying $30, $35. And that's still going through centralized systems. It's just kind of different centralized systems doing all their handshaking. If I want to, I sent a package. It was like signing contracts across the ocean. That took something like $100 to send those documents. And, you know, because I wanted them there within the week. Cross the Atlantic Ocean, signed documents, $100. And so when you actually are sending things of value, especially globally and especially securely, it's actually pretty expensive. Our expectations, like we're so used to these like kind of quick fiat settlements, which are just layers on top of the system. And when we compare that to Bitcoin, we think Bitcoin looks expensive. But when you compare Bitcoin to shipping gold globally or shipping documents globally, it's actually really cheap. And like as one, you know, this is a gold coin. It's a 1 ounce gold coin.
Is that a real one?
Real gold coin. You can tell because of the weight. But the reason I kind of point that out, so that's 1 ounce gold coin.
How did you just magic this out?
I'm a magician. Who doesn't always have gold coins?
That's amazing.
So
what does one of those cost?
So this is about $2,000 at the moment. One ounce gold coin.
Yeah.
And this one's older than me. This is a 1979 South African gold coin.
I was one.
Yeah,
I was born in
and
78.
it looks brand new, doesn't it?
It does.
That's why it's gold. That's the point of gold. And the point of that, so that's if you buy something like that, you pay something like a 5% markup to the actual gold price, and that markup for a $2,000 gold coin is about $100. It could be $80. It depends where you're buying it from, but it fluctuates over time. But you're paying a markup. And if you look at what is the markup on a really big bar, it'll be a little smaller. They actually sell 1 gram gold coins, and they have like a 50% markup. So if you're getting, say, $100 of gold in it, you're paying like $150, which is really silly.
Yeah.
And part of what you're paying for is the verification that that's actually gold, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a big gold bar, you could fill it with tungsten and just have a centimeter of gold around it.
Which has happened a lot, right?
It has happened a lot. The smaller you go, the more surface area there is to mass, and therefore it becomes less likely, less economical to cheat.
Yes.
Right? So the probability that that's got a little tiny slim silver of tungsten in it is exceedingly low.
Yeah.
Compared to, because it's not economical to do that at scale. If you went down to a gram coin, it's literally impossible.
Yeah.
Because that's a 1 ounce, so there's very little room to mess around. The surface area is pretty significant. So from the combination of the surface and the weight, you can be 99 point something % sure that is actually gold. But the point is that's a pretty expensive verification process.
Yeah.
Basically all the surface stuff had to kind of prove it. To get, if you want to buy that, you have to go to, pay all the gas and time and mileage to go to a coin shop and get it, or you get it shipped to you. Might cost $20 insured shipping if you get a couple of them. And that's not even, if I want to send that globally to someone, in the post, it's going to if I especially want it there in a couple of days, it costs $100.
And what if you owed me $1,000 now? You're not going to snap it.
How do I do it? And so if you were saving gold and you wanted to stack gold, right? Anything short of like a $2,000 gold coin could be a silly markup, right? The smaller you go, the bigger the markup is. It doesn't make sense to stack grams of gold and pay 50% markup every time. And so all of our existing ways to kind of hold bare asset money is actually pretty expensive, and Bitcoin is cheaper than a lot of them.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's particularly impressive. Were you prepared for that? You're like, I've got to bring a gold coin into this.
Sometimes I have one in my purse, sometimes I don't.
Pruderan. That's very cool.
Yeah, it's South African. So point is, going back to your question around self-sovereignty.
Yes.
The thing I replied to on Twitter X that day was self-sovereignty is a Platonic ideal. So if people don't know the Platonic ideal jargon, it's basically something that's the ideal version of something that doesn't necessarily exist in nature. So a classic example is a perfect circle.
Yes.
We know what a perfect circle is. It's a geometric concept, but there's actually no perfect circles in nature. Nor even our machinery, we can't make an actual perfect circle. We can get really close, or a perfectly straight line, for example. So we know the conception of what a circle is. They don't actually exist. So when you think of self-sovereignty, you could actually argue that nobody's self-sovereign if you define it as strictly as possible, which is you get Bitcoin, you run the node, you verify it, you've audited every line of code in the node you're running, including every line of every library that code uses, which nobody's done. I don't think Satoshi's not done that, right? And
so there's a certain amount of trust.
Yeah. So you're always trusting something. You could be a very highly machined circle, but you're still not perfect. You can have practical, I would call it practical self-sovereignty. But even then, we live in a world where there have been bugs on Bitcoin. And so far it's navigated through those, and there's fallback methods and things like that. But basically, everybody's doing some degree of trust. And so the question is, how much are you trusting? And of course, there are pretty big cutoff points. So there's a spectrum of trust, but then there's kind of parts where you fall off pretty significantly. So if you're not holding your keys on chain, that's a pretty big stepwise degradation in terms of self-sovereignty. There are scaling solutions that you start giving up some degree of sovereignty, but you still have some aspect of it. And then there's other ones where you diffuse your risk so much that you don't really have self-sovereignty, but you're still much step up compared to any other kind of existing systems you can work with anyway.
Which you're very keen on diffusing risk on.
Yes. I think basically you want to get as many people that want to have their own money privately to be able to do it and effectively. And to say, well, here's a spectrum that you can choose from, and different solutions make sense for different people. There's also, when you talk about self-sovereignty, another thing to think of is what specifically trying to accomplish with it, right? So for example, I could have come here wearing a bulletproof vest. I could just wear one all the time because it's safer. Why wouldn't I always wear a bulletproof vest?
Especially if you're walking around with gold coins.
Yeah, there you go. But I don't, because it's expensive. It's I don't like how it looks. It's uncomfortable. I haven't actually worn one, but I imagine they're pretty heavy.
Tatum walks around with one of those.
Yeah, Tatum does. Yeah. So other than Tatum, no one really does this. And there's a reason for it, which is we don't always expect an adversarial environment.
Yeah.